Johnny Mac is in with us. Mike and Pete, Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. We got a lot to dive into. NFL Week 14, John, where the men become separated from the boys. Wins and losses mean a lot more to every team, including Philadelphia and L.A. And tonight we got a whole heck of a lot to dive into. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Yeah, December is when you generally set yourself apart, and obviously it's much easier to get to the Super Bowl if you get that one of those first-round buys, and obviously you want the number one seed.
As some teams are thinking about number one seed and home field for the playoffs, others are already thinking about next season and what went wrong this year. We've seen one coach fired in New York. Now we've got a GM fired in Cleveland, but the coach will stay. Fair or unfair? I know you're not a big Sashi Brown guy, but if you're going to allow him to make some of the trades that he made, shouldn't you at least allow him to pick the players with the picks that he got?
No, I mean, because
this is the Sam Hinkie of Cleveland. Because if this Browns team ends up being pretty good because of these picks, is this guy going to be looked at as maybe he knew what he was doing?
Well, I mean, there's always revisionist historians, so that's a possibility. However, we've already seen. I mean, first of all, we can say football's not basketball. We all understand that. There's worst to first every year, literally, in the NFL. You can turn it around that quickly if you make the right decisions and go from last place in your division to first place. So there's no need for multi-year tanks in the NFL. But even if you want to stipulate there's a special year and a special quarterback that could make you for the next decade or so, and you want to go in that direction, they had the opportunity to get two of them, and they passed on both. So there is literally no defense of Sashi Brown on either side of the fence. You might agree with what he was doing, but the decision-making when it came to the most important position in this game was atrocious.
Right. Now, at some point, somebody had to agree with him out there, right? Like, he had to get the green light to make a lot of these trades that seemingly – now, look, I agree with you. Football and basketball, two different animals. You and I have not seen eye to eye on the Sixers, but I agree with you in football. I don't advocate giving up a season based on the fact that you're hoping to get a quarterback somewhere down the line. So we agree there. But that being said, somebody had to at least advocate for him to make some of the trades to compile these draft choices.
Well, I mean, when you hire somebody to be the head of your football operations, in theory, you're advocating them to make any moves they want. So from the standpoint of hiring the guy, obviously it's Jimmy Haslam. So they allowed him to do what he thought was best for that organization for nearly 2 years. And I think if Carson Wentz didn't turn out to be Carson Wentz, if Deshaun Watson didn't turn out to be Deshaun Watson, perhaps we're having a different conversation, and he has more rope. But the fact that you swung and you didn't swing, I should say, you stood in the batter's box and just let it pass you, it's real difficult to look at the upcoming draft and say, this group is going to get it right when it comes to evaluating the quarterback prospects, because they were so woefully wrong over the past 2 years. And I think it's more with that than anything else. Look, he got a lot of draft picks. There's no question about it. The Browns,
a lot, yeah.
Whoever's set up there is going to be able to add significant talent, and maybe he deserves some credit for that. And by the way, he's already added significant talent, but it hasn't added up to anything because he hasn't been able to get the quarterback. And the fact that he kept saying, well, Carson Wentz is not going to be a top 20 quarterback in this league. Think about the absurdity of that. And then Deshaun Watson, and we're not even bringing up Patrick Mahomes because I'm not sold on him, and I'm certainly not sold on Mitchell Trubisky. So, and Dak Prescott, I don't think is fair. because everybody passed on him numerous times.
Right, that's a fourth-round pick.
Yeah. So I don't think that's fair, but I think it's really fair to look at Watson and Wentz and say, come on, what are you thinking? This is the most important position on the field. You have two big-time prospects, and you assume that you're going to get somebody better down the line. It just doesn't make sense.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, I understand the premise. Like, hey, you had a couple of quarterbacks, you passed on them.
Do you think they ended up where they belong, though, John? I mean, like, because there was a lot of discussion, like Goff, Wentz, which way do you go? Do you think each quarterback it worked, the system, maybe not at first for Goff, but did it work out the way it should have worked out for one and two?
I think a good spinoff of that question is, would these guys be as good as they are if they were in Cleveland? Or are they still 1-27? You know what I mean?
No, there's no way they're 1-27. I shouldn't say they might be 1-27 with Jared Goff, but I doubt it. They certainly wouldn't be 1-27 with Carson Wentz, and they wouldn't be 10-2 either in their second year because they have a lot of other issues. But you would have seen incremental improvement, significant improvement, and even with Goff, because I think Hugh Jackson is smart enough to get something out of him. So it would have been better. And they would have been heading and trending in the right direction. And there would have been, more importantly, there would have been significant optimism. And interesting, Cleveland would have taken Jared Goff. That's the quarterback they wanted. And if the Rams, for instance, decided that they wanted Carson Wentz, the Browns would have stayed there and taken Jared Goff.
So fair or unfair, then, that Hugh Jackson gets to stay? Because you're bringing in a new GM and telling him, well, you're stuck with this guy. Or do you not believe that he's in the clear yet?
Well, Jimmy Haslam said he is, so I got to take him on his word. I mean, he's the owner of the franchise. Now, the Browns have been sort of backdooring it with potential GM candidates for a while now, so they've been sort of whispering with people because they knew they were going to go in a different direction. If it's, say, John Dorsey and Haslam has the okay that he would like Hugh Jackson, then I have no problem with it. But if you're going to lose a GM candidate like John Dorsey because you're going to force a head coach on him, well, then I think it's a disaster. I think it's a big mistake.
Yep. So today, Sashi Brown fired from Cleveland. A second team has made a pretty significant move. Two GMs fired in season here. Now, John, Pete and I were talking earlier regarding McVay really, the success that he has had this year.
So young.
And to me, this might spark a little bit of that, hey, we want to find that next boy genius guy. You saw it a couple of years ago with quarterbacks. Robert Griffin III was the Rookie of the Year. Everybody was kind of looking for that mobile quarterback. That fad kind of went away quickly. But do you think that this offseason you'll see more of the retread guys, or do you think everyone's going to be looking for that new boy genius?
Well, I think they've already started that trend. I think it started before Sean McVay. He was just much younger, but it really started with Adam Gase and Ben McAdoo and people like that who are very young head coaches, even going back to Mike Tomlin when he first got the Pittsburgh job. So everybody is intent on getting a young guy that can be there for 20 years if they hit. But if you think everybody's going to go that route, I don't agree with that. I still think if you look at the successful coaches in this league, I mean, obviously it starts with Bill Belichick. Technically, he's a retread. Pete Carroll's a retread. And then you look at the 10-win teams. Well, Bill's old. Mike Tomlin's been there for a while. Mike Zimmer's old. And then you have Doug Peterson. I mean, I think it depends more on the person and how you feel with them than someone looking for a young offensive mind specifically. And I think you got to give Sean McVay a ton of credit. I think he's done a wonderful job, but to assume that there's a lot of 31-year-olds like him. A, there aren't, and B, I wouldn't overlook the Jim Schwartzes of the world, for instance, just because you think you want a 31-year-old wonder kid. I think you have a better opportunity to hit on Jim Schwartz than the opposite.
Well, I mean, and we were talking about why that might be why DiFilippo could be a more attractive candidate than Schwartz, because he's kind of a boy wonder at 39, and he's a quarterback coach for Carson Wentz. He must be relatable,
Yeah, and I think he will get a lot of looks and a lot of nibbles. And it's interesting to compare because the Eagles will have two head coaching potential candidates if they could leave, and one's Jim and one's DiFilippo. So, I think it's a great matchup, and I think this week you're going to see Jim Schwartz against Sean McVay. And I think Sean's going to have some trouble. I really do. Because Jim's smart enough to understand what he's doing, and they're using sort of a, lack of a better term, a college-like system where they go up to the line of scrimmage and he looks at, and the quarterback looks at him. And to be honest, I don't think it's going to work long-term in the NFL. So I think the jury's still out on Sean McVay. I think he's done a wonderful job sort of rescuing Jared Goff's career, but now you have to develop him. Because if you continue with the system and he doesn't improve as far as being able to do things at the line of scrimmage, ultimately you're going to fail. So I think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered, in the fact that, yeah, it's great to take advantage of what you have currently, and that's sort of the job description of every coach, but you also have to develop players so they're better equipped down the road. And that's the one we still have to see, because Jared Goff has to learn to do certain things at the line of scrimmage, because the best quarterbacks in this league, you always want the Tom Brady. You always want the Peyton Manning, the guys who can do things themselves on the fly. Those are the truly, truly great quarterbacks. And that was my biggest criticism of Chip Kelly, the fact that those guys, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, could never fit into his offense. He wouldn't want quarterbacks like that. And that's an indictment. If Sean McVay is that type of coach, ultimately he's not going to be successful.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. John, so much talk about coaching vacancies and where they may be, but of course there's some general manager vacancies that are opening up. Do you think Joe Douglas gets a GM job somewhere else?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with how the Eagles finish. I really do. If they win 13, 14 games and they make a deep playoff run, whether it's the NFC Championship game or Super Bowl, then I say yes, 100%. If they kind of fall off and kind of limp to the finish line and have a one-and-done playoff type situation, I don't think it's a home run by any stretch of the imagination. And that's for the coaching candidates as well. So there's still work to be done, but there's no doubt that Joe Douglas is going to be on some short list, and especially if the Eagles continue to play well, it's going to be a serious situation as far as potentially losing him.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and, of course, read his national column, Extra Points, at our website. Follow him on Twitter, at JF McMullen. John, back to the coaching things real fast. Schefter and Mortensen had said on Countdown the other day that they think there could be up to 10 vacancies. Now, we tried to count them up, and with Hugh Jackson basically getting brought back, I think it's going to be more in the 7 range. But let me just throw a couple of teams your way and get your opinion. John Fox in Chicago.
Yeah, he's gone. There's
now,
no
let me ask you,
about that.
Does John Fox get another head coaching job? It would be his 4th.
I think it'll have to be a while. He'd have to sort of sit out a year and then try to come back into it, and then it's a potential. But John's had some health issues as well. I mean, with his age, you start to think it might be the end of the road for a combination of those reasons. But, you know, he's been as things have gone horribly in Chicago, he's also had a lot of success bringing two different franchises to the Super Bowl. So you never say never, but I would trend towards this is probably the end of the line for him. And really, in a lot of these type situations, look, he was in a no-win situation. This is more the general manager, Ryan Pace's fault in Chicago for what happened there and the fact that they're going with a kid who's just not prepared to play. You're going to lose a lot of football games. But now they have to bring in. That's an organization that needs a Sean McVay type because you have to bring in a coach that could sort of get Mitchell Trubisky going on the right track quickly. And that's going to be an offensive-minded guy, obviously.
By the way, while we're talking here, quick breaking news. The Sixers have traded Jahlil Okafor, Nick Stauskas, and a second-round pick to Brooklyn for Trevor Booker. So we'll dive more into that coming up. So the Okafor era in Philly is done. Let's go back to what we're talking about with John here. Marvin Lewis, they couldn't get a contract done, but, I mean, they had an awful meltdown the other night.
No, and it's not the first. I mean, it was pretty much writing on the wall when you let a coach be a lame duck, and especially a coach that's been around as long as Marvin. It was going to have to be playoffs or bust for him to keep his job. They're not going to make the playoffs, most likely. Obviously, things are jumbled in the AFC. There's a potential if they win out, but there's no evidence that that's going to happen. So I would think they're finally going to move on. And there's even been some whispers that Marvin Lewis could be the GM in Cleveland because he's so close with Hugh Jackson. How much of a disaster would that be for Cleveland?
Wow, mesmerizing there. All right, let's move to another one here. Indianapolis, Pagano.
Yeah, he's out. And again, a really difficult situation for him because obviously you don't have Andrew Luck, you don't have a chance. And Ryan Grigson did him no favors, but it's a results-oriented league, and you're the face of the franchise, and they're definitely going to go in a different direction.
Dirk Cutter.
Boy, it's going to be tough for Tampa Bay to move forward with him. And just from the fact that Jameis Winston has regressed the way he has. I mean, if you go back to when the Bucs fired Lovie Smith, it was to elevate Dirk Cutter because they didn't want to lose him to a potential other head coaching job because they wanted to keep the same system, the same coach for Jameis Winston, and it just hasn't worked out. He's sort of plateaued as a player. So I think Tampa Bay it's going to be one of those 7 or 8 teams.
All right, a couple others here. Garrett in Dallas.
I think he'll be safe, even if the Cowboys don't make the playoffs. Jerry Jones likes him. He doesn't make waves. And I think there aren't a lot of coaches that want to go into a situation as high profile as it seems to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Sounds like a great job, the marquee franchise in this league. But Jerry Jones learned when Bill Parcells was there, if you got a strong-minded coach who's going to do what he wants, that's not what Jerry wants. He wants a guy who's going to do what he's told. And that defines Jason Garrett to a T. So I don't think he's going to move away from that.
All right, Vance Joseph in Denver, one and done?
I do think he's one and done for a number of reasons, namely the collapse on the football field. And even from the defensive standpoint, the quarterback situation, it's more John Elway's fault, obviously. But there were a number of issues with Vance Joseph that came out when he got hired and in this environment where you've had all the sexual harassment stories and things like that, I could see those sort of bubbling up to the surface because of the lack of success and the critics trying to take shots at him. So I think John's going to say, let's go in a different direction.
What about Bill O'Brien? The quarterback situation there he's had is a bit of a mess. He finally got a guy. They seemed like they were on the right track, and that guy gets hurt.
Yeah, I think they will understand that because they were doing so well when Deshaun Watson was inserted. They were so explosive. It looked like it was going to be special. So I think the injury kind of buys Bill O'Brien an extra year because that kid is going to be really, really good. And it looked like he had tapped into it and was able to kind of maximize his ability. So I think he can kind of sell that to get another year in Houston.
Any other coach I haven't brought up that you think is on a hot seat, potential? I know that the fans of Detroit have a petition together to buy out Jim Caldwell. I don't know if that puts him on a hot seat or not, but is there somebody, Andy Reid, they've lost a bunch of games out there. I wouldn't think that they wanted to move on there, but anybody I haven't mentioned.
There's always one or two, and especially you look at that AFC West. We talked about Vance Joseph. I think Jack Del Rio could be in trouble if the Raiders get really bad down the stretch. Andy, as you mentioned, if you talk about the collapse, if you start 5-0 and you finish with 6 or 7 wins, I think when you see what happened in John Dorsey getting forced out, and we know better than anyone in this market how polarizing Andy Reid can be, and you have the people on Andy's side and the people on the other side. A lot of people think Andy Reid forced John Dorsey out. A lot of people defend him. It's not going to look good if they collapse to this degree and don't make the playoffs. So that's an sort of outside the box one you have to keep an eye on. But the obvious ones you certainly hit on.
Real quick, John, before we let you roll here, Sal Powell earlier said that he said, I would not say the Eagles are loose. I would say this team learned a very valuable and painful lesson, and they are beginning to feel some pressure. Now, I know you're not being with them in practice this week. It's hard to kind of get that beat on them, but is this a game that if they lost, that the pressure would be legitimate? I mean, they're still going to make the playoffs, regardless. Even if they lose out with 10 wins, they probably should get in. But if they lose this week, would you feel like a team coming home would have the makings of a team that feels the pressure?
Yeah, I would. And I kind of said that before the Seattle game. I said the only unacceptable result on this West Coast trip was 2 losses. That would be unsuccessful, and that would have doubt creeping into everyone's mind. If you split, you're fine. I thought the split was going to go in the opposite direction, but if it goes this way and they beat the Rams, I think all is copacetic. If they lose, I mean, people are going to start to really whisper and really question what's going on, even though it's 2 really good football teams on the road. You mentioned they're going to make the playoffs. If worst comes to worst, they're going to beat the Giants the next week. So that part of it's not an issue. The part that is you went from being the number 1 seed to looking up at Minnesota right now, and if you lose another game, then you got to start looking at the Rams in the rearview mirror, and even a first-round bye could ultimately be off the table. So it's very important to get this game.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Don't forget, countdown to kickoff, 1 o'clock on Sunday, live from the Rusty Nail, getting you ready for Eagles and Rams, which should be a fun one. All right, John, we'll talk tomorrow and get your pick for the game.
All right, thank you, guys.